Welcome to this week's edition of Coach Prep. Coach Don and I are working on a Zoom this week, but we got a great topic for you. I listened to a podcast where I got to hear an interview with Greg Olsen. Many of you know him as an NFL announcer and a former NFL player, but he's very involved with youth sports. He's got 3 of his own kids now, kind of in the trenches with all of us, playing different sports, and heard some very interesting things that I wanted to share in this week's Coach Prep that I think applies to the idea of being a better coach. So before we get into that, though, let's talk about patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. If you're in a position where you can help us, we would love to have more people come on board as patrons. The reality of the podcast business right now is that we definitely need more people to come on board. We also have some sponsorship opportunities for anybody who's interested in pursuing that. But our greatest strength has been our patrons. We've got a great group that have been supporting us for a long time, but we definitely need to get some new blood into the system. So if you're in a position where you can, please check out patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. We would love for you to help support the podcast and keep us going into the future. So, Don, I thought this was an interesting thing. Listening to that podcast, Greg Olsen did a series of podcasts called Youth Inc. So it's youth is one word, then INK like incorporated. He had about 40, 45 podcasts in season 1. He's working on season 2, but he was talking about the trials and tribulations of people going through the world of youth sports. And the one thing that he talked about that I thought really applied to us and is something that we should be discussing in reference to our coaches is that in their system, their strategy for coaches, the thing that they're measuring for their teams is who can keep getting better longer. So basically, who's got a system in place where their players continually improve, continually develop, continually become better players so that from 10 to 11 or 11 to 12 or 17 to 18, that you look at each player in your program and you can honestly say that Sally's a better player today than she was when she started the season. She's a better player now than she was when she started last year. And I just thought that was such a powerful thought because I think, unfortunately, way too many of us in the coaching business, and I'm certainly as guilty of this as anybody, we want to point to the 896 wins and say, well, see, that proves I was a great coach. Versus, did every player continue to get better? Did we do a good job of making sure that, from day 1 to day 180 of the season, that a player actually did continue to develop and continue to improve? And so I think it's a really important idea and a seed that needs to be planted because, especially in the younger ages, I keep seeing an awful lot of coaches that are so worried about winning and losing that I don't think that they're thinking about any of the other stuff that really should be a higher priority for them.
No, I think that's a great concept. And, whether it's an athlete training or a coach that's coaching, for us to not have any regrets and feel like, what, I really think I probably could have done better for player X. To not have those regrets would be really joyful. And, as you're describing some of this, I'm thinking back to times where I felt like, I probably could have done more. I could have been a little more individualized in each of the players rather than just doing things for the whole group, and a lot of times it's tough to facilitate everything for everybody. But there's often times when I feel like I probably could have provided a little bit more help or opportunity or practice time or whatever it might have been in some situations and been a little bit better at what my contribution was. If we can help the listeners try and get around some of those little pitfall moments by taking a harder look or just being a little more thorough in what we can do for each of the kids, then I think they'll have less of that feeling when they complete their coaching time. Yeah.
Right. Well, and to me, I think that sometimes what happens is the hardcore coaches amongst us, we hear something like, well, did my players continue to develop? And somehow, people want to turn that into some sort of soft approach that means that I don't care about winning or losing. And the reality of it is, I think you can have both. A lot of really successful coaches, a lot of them, whether they know it or not, are doing a really good job at seeing their players continue to develop, continue to improve. And, I think that the challenge now, or is the thought that I wanted to enter into today, is if we're a little bit more conscious of it, if we're really thinking about that is what I'm trying to do, does that lead to more success in the long run anyhow? Instead of worrying about winning and losing, if I really do invest myself in making sure that the players I have assembled are going to be way better players at the end of the time that we work with them this year than they were when they started, that has to lead to winning more games. To my way of thinking, I cannot imagine how, if I've got 12 kids on my roster and all 12 of them improve, that we're not going to win more and have more success than we would have if we had just gone into it thinking, these are my 9 best and I'm going to run them out there and we're not going to worry about anything except winning games. I think it's one of those that we don't have to feel like we're softening up or acting some sort of way that's outside of our competitiveness by focusing on development and focusing on helping every player become the best version of themselves. And I just loved the idea of our goal is to make sure that our players get better the longest. And if we start to think about that, because I know I've seen a whole lot of instances in the time that I've been in the instructor business where kids hit a plateau and stop improving. They get to a point where the teams that they're on or the people that they're working with just don't push them to get better. Because we've talked about the whole comfort zone thing, and you get used to wanting to be as good as you are, and you think that as good as you are is good enough. But seeing enough of those kids plateau and maybe not reaching their full potential is a little bit heartbreaking.
The idea that we're needing to analyze all this stuff all the time can feel overwhelming a little bit. But I think that at the end of the day, if we're doing the best we can and providing the best opportunity for all the kids, that we're all going to be a lot more excited at the end. And like you said, if we're working on each of the kids' skills and abilities and providing everything that they need, that as a group, we're going to have a lot more success. And It's kind of hard to test it, but I think that we'll be satisfied with the job we do if we're being attentive to each of the kids as well as not just the wins and loss thought, like you said. That's cool.
I won't get it right off the top of my head, but the old saying about whole is stronger than the sum of its parts or whatever. But I know for sure if the sum of the parts continues to go up, the whole's got to go up, right? So if we can keep that idea, and again, I think you can do both. I think you can be thinking about team concepts while you're still making sure that all your players are better at them. Just because I'm going to say, Don, we're going to make sure that you're the very best version of you that you can be, doesn't mean that we stop working on you being where you're supposed to be on a bunt play, or you being where you're supposed to be to back up a play or something like that. It's not like we're going to turn it into some sort of mamby-pamby, all I'm going to do is, worry about Don and make sure that Don gets better, but make sure that Don gets better within what we're working on as a team. Again, I just think it's a really powerful thought that I think is worth sharing. So for all of our coaches, instead of measuring the success of your season, this fall season, for those of you that are playing travel ball, or the high school coaches here in Georgia that just finished up their season, instead of saying, well, I'm obviously a great coach, my team won a state championship, take a step back and look at it and say, well, okay, but how much did my team really improve? How much did my players really improve? Did I do a good job of helping them within a team concept become the best version of themselves that I could? And I think that that's a target that's definitely worth pointing to. I wish I had thought about this about 30 years ago. And again, I thought we always did a good job of helping players improve, but the idea that player improvement was the thing that was going to lead to team success was not something that I really thought about as a foundation. To me, it was that the team's going to win games and we're going to work on the stuff that makes us win. And if that meant that some players got better and some players didn't, I was probably too okay with that. And so, I think you mentioned it earlier, Don, looking back, well, did I do enough to individualize practices, or was I thinking enough about all the individual players? I think all of us probably fall short on that measuring stick hindsight. So moving forward, let's make sure we're thinking about, am I doing the best I can to help all my players become the best that they can be? And if we do that, I'll bet you everything I own that your team's going to be happier, more successful, and you're going to end up probably winning more games than you would have working to win more games. So that's going to wrap up this week's Coach Prep. Please make sure you reach out to us with suggestions, ideas, topics that you would like us to discuss. Coach Don and I want to make sure that we're talking about stuff that you're interested in, and having feedback and ideas from our listeners is really going a long way towards helping us do that. Please make sure you go to the fastpitchprep.com website or your Square Cuts training discs there. You can also have access to the YouTube channel and the blog post. There's tons and tons of information on the fastpitchprep.com website. Become a patron. Go to patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. We need your support, and we would love for you to come on board and help to keep the podcast thriving. So for Coach Don McKinley, our producer Stan Lewis, this is Coach Torrey. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.